Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another continuation of the Science Safety K-12 Safety Webinar Series. Tonight's session is being facilitated by Dr. Ken Roy, and our topic is accommodations for students with additional needs in STEAM programs. And this is a very, very important topic, one that is top of mind. It's very personal and profound. And many of us have experiences with this, and many of us are looking for additional information and insight. And I am confident that Dr. Ken will be able to provide that for us in this session. Now, tonight, I just want to, before we start, I want to provide you with an overview of what we'll be discussing. Dr. Ken will help us explore some of those common strategies, accommodations, and modifications, and there is a difference between those two. For students with additional needs in science, STEAM, CTE laboratories. And he'll also review the better professional safety practices that can help reduce the potential hazards and resulting risks for staff and students while still providing a robust teaching and learning experience. And Dr. Ken, I love your comment in here that together we can work to increase safety awareness and help you stay safer with all of your students. And I like the emphasis on the word all, because it's so true. Now, here's a little bit of background on our presenter, Dr. Roy. He is the Director of Environmental Health and Safety. He is the Chemical Hygiene Officer. He's also the Designated Asbestos Compliance Coordinator, the PCB Program Coordinator, the Silica Compliance Coordinator, and all of this is for Glastonbury Public Schools. But that's not enough of accomplishments for Dr. Roy, because he's also the Chief Science Safety Compliance Advisor and Chief Safety Blogger for the NSTA, or the National Science Teaching Association. And he's the Safety Compliance Officer for NSELA, the National Science Education Leadership Association. And in his free time, he's the author of 13 science and STEM laboratory safety books and over 800 safety articles in professional journals and associations, including NSTA, NSELA, Council of Science or Council of State Science Supervisors, ITEEA, and others. Welcome to the program, Dr. Ken.
Thank you, James. Appreciate it.
Not a problem.
You want to do on this line? Do you want me to?
Sure. Jacqueline Monteith is unable to attend this evening. However, she was a very large contributor to putting this session together. Jacqueline was a science teacher. She is now an instructional coach with the FSD, or Frontier School Division. She supports teachers and students using a variety of strategies. She's also a professor at the Faculty of Education, Brandon University. She is instrumental in coming up with distance education, remote education, and dealing with students with additional needs and multiple effective methods and strategies for facilitating student engagement all across the K-12 spectrum. Okay, so Dr. Ken, let's begin. It's your show now, my friend. Have at it.
Great. First of all, I want to welcome everyone and thank you for spending part in your evening with us. I know you all have busy schedules, I'm sure, and it just shows the sense of commitment that you have to helping, again, improve education and also to make it safer. And let me start right off by saying, not safe, safer. Remember, you can't make it safe. Accidents can happen, all right? No matter how hard you try, accidents can still happen. They're unplanned. But by following through with training, safety protocols, et cetera, you most certainly can make it safer. And what we're going to focus on tonight, as James has said, students with additional needs, exceptional. In other words, specific learning disability, intellectual disability, emotional behavioral, deaf or hard of hearing, visually impaired, central impairment, orthopedic. I mean, on and on and on it goes. And it seems at least anecdotally, that these types of additional needs are increasing. And I'm sure that many of you have noticed this. I am suspect as to why, but we'll leave that for another time. Okay, so students identified additional needs have an IEP and a diagnosis, right? Hopefully, it's caught in time to help these kids be successful. That's not always the case, unfortunately, in some school districts. Next.
And I see that on your list here. I'm sure that's not an exhaustive list either. I'm sure there
No.
are multiple other exceptionalities that exist.
Yes. Next slide.
Oh, sorry, Ken. I have one job.
It's hard to get good help these days.
Difficult.
Anyways, understanding there are risks, okay? To increase student engagement, remember with science, STEAM, CTE, Fab Labs, makerspaces, etc., right? We want to increase student engagement. In other words, not just reading about this stuff, but actually engage doing it. Support learning, there's an emphasis on hands-on learning, all right? Hands-on learning, absolutely critical for science and STEM and STEAM, etc. This emphasis increases the potential safety hazards and resulting risks. And it's not only for the students, it potentially is also for the staff, the teachers, the paraprofessionals, special needs staff, et cetera, et cetera. So bold print here for a reason. Extra attention is needed for students with additional needs in laboratories for safety concerns. And remember, there are basically 3 types of hazards that are found in laboratories. And I'm just going to use the term laboratory, and that could be applied to science, STEAM, CTE, Fab Lab, whatever. So I'm going spectrally here when I say laboratory. There are physical hazards, usually that you're coming out of the physical sciences like physics and other earth space science, right? And it could be something as simple as using a meter stick. Believe it or not, a meter stick is a physical hazard. That's a lever, all right? And the fulcrum is where you're holding it. And some kids, they'll just take it and they'll flip it around. Well, now you've got a meter and it can whack somebody right in the eye, all right? So that's a hazard. Obviously, the risk is ultimately hitting in the eye and blinding somebody. There are chemical hazards, all right? And usually, again, chemistry and biology are the ones that tend to have more of these. And biological hazards. And again, usually in biology, though again, it can be in these other areas also. So we're looking at a very high frequency of the possibility. Let's put it this way. It's not your simple math class or your language arts or your world language class, right? Laboratories are hazardous. Laboratories have risks well above the other areas, academic areas. So this even adds more attention that needs to be given relative to safety concerns. Next. Very good. All right, safety concerns. It is critical to ensure that students with disabilities are not presumed to be unsafe. Again, let me restate that, right? Students with disabilities are not presumed to be unsafe and are empowered using institutional resources to safely meet their learning potential in laboratories. All right, that's a very important statement. And, it's unfortunate, but a lot of staff members, I'm going to use the word clueless, all right, when it comes to working with special needs students that have disabilities. Part of it is they may not be familiar with it. They were never educated. They were never trained, this, that, and whatever. And we really need to raise their level of awareness. And that's one good reason that you're here, to be working with your colleagues to help them so they'll have a better understanding of exactly what's going on here, all right? And not to presume that they are unsafe, because that's not true. Next. Safer lab strategies. Okay, Provide a reliable lab partner for hands-on activities. The buddy system, what a great idea. Yes, of course it is. All right. A buddy system, reliable partner. Allow extra time for activity setup, hands-on piece, the doing, and the takedown portions of essential lab work. Use a combination of written, verbal, and pictorial instructions with scaffolding, right? All of these are to help promote safer labs, right? There are strategies that teachers need to use. Now, safer labs are to demonstrate laboratory procedures and allow students time to practice. Absolutely critical. Before they pick up a test tube, before they look in that microscope, whatever they're going to be doing, even picking up a slinky in a physics or physical science lab, demonstrate laboratory procedures. But you not only demonstrate, you allow students time to practice them, right? Just don't go, well, this is how you do blah, blah, blah. Okay, let's move on. No, that is not how you do it. They need time to learn to digest it, to build the reflex arc so they automatically have it happen. Build in frequent, brief breaks. All right, remember, students, like adults, can only focus for so long. If they're really interested in whatever, the focus time goes up. But the point is, brief breaks are good. Give preferential seating to avoid distraction and minimize extraneous stimuli and access to exits and eye wash stations. Absolutely critical. Absolutely critical. Allow students to use assistive technology to help them learn and understand the content. Next. The Americans with Disability Act. I'm sure everyone has heard of this. There are many examples of people with disabilities, and we went through the list a few slides ago, who excel in careers where they work in laboratory environments at universities, at government agencies, such as the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, NASA, and at private companies, right? So the point is, this is promise. This is promise. This tells you that what you're doing is important for these students because they're going to take those skills that you teach them, especially in safety, and they're going to apply it in the job site. Next. IDEA and ADA, focal points. The American with Disabilities Act, the ADA, and the Individuals with Disabilities in Education Act, IDEA, ensures that students have equitable, let me say that again, equitable access to learning in order to be successful citizens. Absolutely. All right. The ADA requires public, Title II, and private Title III educational institutions to provide equal access for qualified individuals with disabilities. Next. The ADA focus. The ADA recognizes that while the content of the coursework and the requisite skills that must be developed can't change. All right, that's an important statement. All right. The content of the coursework and the requisite skills, especially relative to safety, can't change. The way those with disabilities approach the necessary work can change, however, to meet their needs. All right. The way those with disabilities approach the necessary work can change. All right, that's bold for a reason. Students are required to provide effective communication, reasonable modification of programs and services they offer, and ensure that individuals with disabilities can access the aids they may need. Next. Prudent practices in the laboratory. Prudent practice in the laboratory states the following. Laboratory personnel realize that the welfare and safety of each individual depends on clearly defined attitudes of teamwork and personal responsibilities, and that laboratory safety is not simply a matter of materials and equipment. Again, not simply a matter of materials and equipment, but also of processes and behaviors. Boy, That is the target right there, right? You can talk all you want about the materials, you can show them in the equipment, but it's how you use them, what you do with them, the processes, and the absolute behavior. Behaviors are critical. You need to make sure people are following the standard safety protocols for the safety of everyone in that laboratory.
Dr. Ken, you and I were speaking just before this started about exactly this, and that the teachers need to model specifically what they want to see in those classrooms with students with additional needs, more so than mainstream classes. And Prudent Practices is a great resource book. It's been around for decades,
Yep,
and it still resonates today just as much as it did in the 80s. It's
absolutely. Yep, good point. All right, universal design, UD. In a science lab, UDB can apply to STEAM labs for the following, right? And again, this is basically any laboratory as far as I'm concerned, right? The lab climate, physical access, usability and safety, delivery methods, informational resources, interaction, feedback, assessment, and plans for accommodation. All right. You've got to foster communications. That is absolutely critical. Fostering communications, right? Making accommodations is reactive, whereas universal design is proactive. Really good point. Again, making accommodations is reactive. However, the UD, you're being proactive, all right? You're not just thinking about right now, you're thinking about 5 minutes, 10 minutes, oh, at the end of the period, into tomorrow, whatever. You need to do that because things are going to come, things are going to happen, things you may not even be aware of, right? And you need to know how to deal with it. But again, fostering this whole idea of communication is absolutely critical. Next. Accommodations and modifications. Okay, an accommodation do not reduce learning, curriculum expectations. Again, accommodations do not reduce learning or curriculum expectations. When a change in instruction or assessment activity lowers the expectation for students' learning, it's considered a modification. Okay, so you're modifying, you're changing it, in other words, right? Again, accommodations, you're not changing it. In the modification, you are. Okay, next. Typical STEAM accommodations. Again, any kind of lab. The nice thing about STEAM, it's spectral. You're talking about science, technology, education, engineering, mathematics, art, et cetera, et cetera. So typical accommodations may include students having extended time to complete tasks, right? Fair enough. Having materials read to them, absolutely. Completing oral assignments, abbreviated assignments, preferential seating, recording lessons, using assistive technology, and other strategies. Safety testing, here's a case in point, may be read to the student, but the student must, capital M-U-S-T, understand and provide correct and appropriate answers to the questions, right? Anybody in that laboratory, anyone in that laboratory is responsible not only for their own safety, but also those around them. So it's absolutely critical. Now, once you demonstrate and review the safety protocols and the like, then you do the assessment, the safety testing, right? And you may have some students that would be more successful in understanding, again, understanding and providing correct and appropriate answers by reading it to them, right? Or having them listen to it. That's not a problem. Again, the bottom line, when you get through the tunnel, is they're right in line with what's going on safety protocol wise. Next. Understanding student needs. This is where reasonable program modifications and accommodations are implemented in the lab. Identifying appropriate student accommodations requires taking a look at the individual, the course material, the specific laboratory space to identify the best options in an individualized assessment and hazard analysis risk assessment prior to laboratory activities being conducted, right? It's not just the same old usual thing here that we're talking about. Teachers, again, need to be thinking not only right now, but a few minutes from now, end of the class, tomorrow, et cetera, right? And that's not an easy task, especially if you are a new teacher just out of the gate, just starting out, right? Because you don't have necessarily the experience in dealing with this. This is why you need to communicate with your colleagues, get a hold of people that are veterans that have an understanding of this, and they can be very helpful to you. Also, special education departments, guidance departments, etc. Next. Students deserve individualized solutions that align with their additional needs. Making accommodations for a student in a wheelchair are for that student only. Again, making accommodations for a student in a wheelchair are for that student only. As a student with a visual or hearing impairment will not benefit from those accommodations. There is, again, another important statement here. There is no one-size-fits-all solution for special education in STEAM labs, in any laboratory. Okay, don't categorize student. Oh, this special needs. Well, this worked with other special needs students, so we'll they're all the same. No, their needs are different. All right. No one size fits all. Very important statement. Next. Accessibility and safety. Policies and procedures for an institution drive both the culture of accessibility and safety. Due to the myriad of potential hazards and resulting risks, again in laboratories we talked about, it is more complicated to be inclusive within a laboratory setting than it is in any other space. The process of creating an accommodation in a lab requires specialized expertise and resources. All right. There are many more challenges in laboratories compared to regular classrooms, which I'm sure you all know, right? You're dealing well beyond magic markers, boards, computers, all right? You're dealing with a lot of different kinds of equipment. You're dealing a lot with chemicals, potentially, biological issues, on and on it goes. So it is quite the challenge. There's no two ways about it. Next. So what are the most common sources of accidents? Believe it or not, and I know this personally because I've done some research with it in 2020, glue guns, all right? Students getting burned. You can't tell necessarily that a glue gun is hot or cold. Of course, when you touch it, you'll know real quick, all right? Equipment and machinery, most certainly, and this is especially true in STEM labs, technology, education labs, where you have power tools and hand tools, even in physics, same type of thing, right? Power tools, as I mentioned, spills, splashes, and projectiles. Somebody's got a hot finger. Anyway, these were reported, injuries were handled at the school level and required no medical attention normally. All right. Okay, next. Most common types of lab injuries. Now, there's a whole list of potential injuries. It all depends on the hazard and what the risks are, as I mentioned before. But generally, All right, obviously we're dealing with power tools, even hand tools, saws, hammers, screwdrivers, chisels, all right, cuts and lacerations, absolutely. Believe me, I've seen it all. Burns, all right, Bunsen burners in a chem lab, right? Trip fall hazards, right? Sometimes they leave book bags all over the floor. No, no, don't do that. Don't do that, because people can trip, fall, as well as the teacher, not only the student, hit their head and get a concussion, right? Hit with projectiles. That can be a real issue if you're not careful. You must make sure that the trajectory is clear of all fragile materials and also people. Fumes. Oh, gee, is your ventilation system working appropriately? Well, you'll know if you're making fumes and they're creating fumes and you can't breathe. And electric shock. Do you have a GFI, GFCI system in every one of your electrical receptacles in your laboratory? If not, you need to get them. 90% of injuries occur on fingers and hands in person. And don't think for a moment that these are necessarily simple kinds of injuries. I mean, I have seen digits sawed off. I'll just stop right there, but I've seen so many things that I had to deal with. It's not good. Hazard analysis, the AAA approach, driving home safety, AAA, right? Administrators, supervisors, teachers have a duty of supervision responsibilities, all right, for the hands-on activities performed in STEAM and CTE programs in their schools. The AAA approach or method requires teachers to perform a hazard analysis before, wait, whoa.
I got all excited. I'm sorry, Ted.
You got overly excited here. All right, before each student demonstration activity, as mandated by standard 45 of the NFPA, then conduct a risk assessment and take the best possible safety action, which might mean eliminate the activity, by the way, all right, because you can't take an appropriate safety action to prevent that hazard from turning into a real nasty risk. In order to perform this three-step approach to understanding and evaluating hazards, okay, forward, next.
Yes, sir.
Here's an analysis. What's a hazard analysis? All right. Physical, chemical, biological hazards. We already talked about this. All right. Those are the three types of hazards in laboratories outlined on a safety data sheet, or STS, and in tandem with teachers' experience. Remember I told you, try to find veteran teachers who've been around. It's not their first rodeo. They know hopefully what they're doing and can be of help to you. Safety notes from lab activities, use of CHP or chemical hygiene plans, and trusted safety authorities, right? You need to analyze what are the hazards. This is before you do any activity or demonstration, I might also add, right? Do a hazard analysis. Then you do a risk assessment. Once the hazard's in place, okay, what are the risks? Well, if it's chemical, you can refer to the safety data sheet, and we have the sections listed there, right? For example, section 8. Why would I go to section 8? Right? Well, I need to know what personal protective equipment am I required to wear with a particular chemical. Section 8 of that SDS tells you that highlight information for safer handling, such as hazards, fire safety, accidental spill information, stability, toxicological information, and much more. All right, once you determine what the hazards and the risks are, you now can decide, okay, what safety actions do I need to take to make it a safer teaching learning experience? What safety actions do I need to take to make it safer teaching learning experience? Determine the appropriate action based on the types of potential hazards and resulting risk. No kidding. The top 3 actions to consider based on OSHA's hazard prevention and control include, number 1, engineering controls. What's an engineering control? All right, that's the technology that's going to help make it safer, like, oh, ventilation, fume hood, eye wash, shower, electrical controls, et cetera, et cetera. Those are all engineering controls, which your laboratory needs to have. administrative controls. In other words, what are the safety protocols? The chemical hygiene plan has all of this in there. Your Board of Education policies and more. And then finally, once those are looked at, it's PPE, personal protective equipment. Again, personal protective equipment. Do I need to use eye protection in the form of glasses or indirectly vented chemical splash goggles? Well, if I have a hazardous liquid, I better be using indirectly vented chemical splash goggles and not safety glasses, because safety glasses are useless. Let me repeat that. Safety glasses are useless from splashes. Now, for physical hazards, safety glasses are fine. You want to use a power tool, you want to use a table saw, a drill press, whatever, that's fine. You can use either one. But when it comes to biological and chemical hazards that are liquids, you need to use indirectly vented chemical splash goggles. And again, even with those, sometimes the activity, hazard and risk, you can't meet to make it safer. So your safety action is don't do it. Find something else that possibly can provide the same educational experience. Next. Special considerations for hazards and risks, individualized analysis. Okay, so what we're saying here is the risk assessment portion of an individualized assessment for a student in a wheelchair must also consider the safety implications of working at the eye level with chemicals and protecting the student from spillage because they are in a sitting position. Now, if you have lab tables and the expectation is a kid is going to be sitting up on a stool or standing, well, now you're going to have a student potentially in a wheelchair. That puts them in a totally different situation safety-wise. All right? Because, for example, if there's a spill, a container, flask goes over, all right? That student could be right in line to get the brunt of that splash, as opposed to someone who's standing several feet higher up, right? So these are the kinds of things you need to be thinking about in those special considerations for the hazards and risks. And these are the things you need to think about, all right? And to make sure through your supervision that these are being followed through make it safer for these students. Next. Proper scale of the activity. Many lab experiments are done at the micro scale. All right, now it's using very small amounts for a variety of reasons, such as you use less chemicals, it's cheaper. Yeah. The risk of exposure to smaller volumes of chemicals may be very different in micro scale equipment than if an experiment must be done in a larger scale in order for a person with impaired vision or inability to grasp the smaller glassware who cannot conduct the procedure in microscale. Well, here you're thinking, oh yeah, microscale, that's great. But yet, for this person with impaired vision or inability to grasp, to hold on, they need larger pieces of equipment, right? So again, one size does not fit all. Next. Planning for an emergency. When there is a possibility of fire, the emergency response plan must be revised for a student with visual impairment. Again, must be revised. The student may not need to practice the route to the closest escape in a non-emergency situation multiple times and or have a designated assistant emergency, all right? The other thing is you need to be very careful. For example, this is just an example, and it's not in the lab necessarily, though most certainly it can be, and there's a lot more instances of that, but even walking down a corridor, you might have water fountains that are edging out into that corridor. And if that student is by themselves walking down, all right, they can bump into that, they can fall over. So the point is, it's a really good idea to have a designated assistance. And that's not in an emergency necessarily, but you can imagine in an emergency with everybody rushing, pushing very quickly, you need to have a designated assistant, someone that's going to help this person out to get out alive and without injury. Next. Access to emergency safety items, right? time to travel for students with additional needs need to be considered for safety, right? They might take longer, and more likely they will, to reach the eye wash or shower unit, depending upon what the need is, the special need, fire extinguisher, or an exit, so their path should be considered as well as their proximity to the unit. The shorter the distance, the better. If the exit is in the front of the lab, you don't want this person sitting in the back of the lab, right? You want them near the front. It gives you a better view of them. You can help them supervision-wise, and you can make it safer for them, most certainly. Next. Modification of lab procedure. A student with additional needs may have to conduct an experiment in a different manner than others in the lab to be safer. All right. A TA or EA or assistant may be needed in order to complete the lab activity or investigation with the student. Modification to the procedure specific to your student's individual needs requires a separate AAA. Again, here we go. Again, AAA hazard analysis, risk assessment, and specific type of safety action. One size does not fit all. How many times has this come up tonight? All right, want to keep drilling this in because something you need to be aware of. Next. Okay, you want to do this, James?
Oh no, this is your baby, Dr.
Oh,
Ken.
this is my baby.
This is your journal. You get to showcase all of your recent research and that it's been published in Safety Science, and that free download is there for all educators.
Absolutely, and you've got the HTTPS site on this. I'm very pleased and proud that Science Safety has taken a lot of the information and results of the research they did at Penn State University with a colleague of mine, Dr. Tyler Love. We've done a lot of professional journal things. But what's nice about this is here's a site you can go to and find out what we discovered in the research, and also recommendations, which is the most important part that can be helpful to you as an educator who works in a laboratory in a K through 12 school or even beyond that, and how, again, you can make it safer. All right. So here's an excellent resource for you. Next.
Oh,
well, I'm getting dizzy, man. What are you
all right. I'll talk about this. When you talk about risk management from a school or a school system perspective, having a real thorough understanding of how all of the different pieces are integrated. This is something that has not been done before either, is that all of the regulations and legislation and different safety constructs that exist have all been, for lack of a better term, simplified here into these 8 categories. And each one of these is a separate pillar that holds up your risk management program for STEAM. And if you look at it, having annual training for educators, administrators, and students, your chemical hygiene plan and safety manuals need to be reviewed, and you actually need to have them, which is something that many people are unaware of. The use of lab safety acknowledgement forms, that needs to be done annually, and they need to be archived for many years. You can't just keep them and throw them away at the end of the year. Conducting that hazard analysis, risk assessment, and safety actions that Dr. Ken just talked about, that needs to be done for each and every activity that's performed prior to that happening. You need to have an abundance of PPE and proper approved certified PPE for all occupants in those labs. You need to have a shared current chemical inventory and associated safety data sheet listing. There also needs to be an annual safety inspection. That means physically going through those departments, your rooms, the chemical storeroom, prep areas, laboratories, and you need to make sure that your chemicals are stored in secured safety cabinets as well. This is really, in a real summary form, what you need to be looking at from a risk management perspective and understand that it repeats every single year. This is not a one and done. This is a continuous, reoccurring event, much like a Mobius strip.
What, can I just make a statement here? Hello?
Yes, of course.
Yeah. Chemical hygiene plan. All right. Now, that is legally required in the states if you're under federal OSHA, which is in private schools primarily, or in public schools, which is usually a state OSHA or a state Department of Labor or something to that effect, right? If you're told that you don't have to have that and you're not under OSHA, that's not true. Because besides legal safety standards, there's something called in the courts better professional safety practices. So the NSTA, for example, Nice Science Teaching Association, states in their safety papers that you need to have a chemical hygiene or a chemical safety, whatever you want to call it, plan. You're supposed to have annual training, all these things that James has been talking about. You know, if an administrator said, oh, well, you don't worry about that, we're not under OSHA. No, that person doesn't know better. And I know this person because I do expert witness work on the courts. When a kid gets hurt, or even a teacher sometimes, right? The court accepts both legal safety standards and better professional safety practices. It's incumbent upon you, right, to help the administrator and supervisor to have an understanding of this. They probably are clueless, don't know about it. In fact, you're going to hear them say, oh, you're going to be held harmless. Don't worry about it. The farthest from the truth. I couldn't tell you how many teachers and administrators, all right, I've determined, because that's my job, is for them to be not too well done legally wise, all right, because they didn't follow through with this stuff. Right? They did not follow through with this stuff. And they're determined to be negligent, or even worse, reckless. In other words, they knew and they did nothing about it. All right. So I just wanted to mention that. I mean, all these things, this frame is just fantastic, right? Because it gives you the spectral view. This is work from beginning to the end. But don't take any crap that, oh, well, you don't need to worry about that. Yeah, you do. Because if it's not legal, it's better professional safety practice that you need to follow, as does your school district. And you know what? Put it in writing. Always, when it comes to safety and you're dealing with supervising administrators, always, you can talk to them about it, but follow up, always put it in writing and keep a copy at home. All right, keep a copy at home. You never know when you're going to need it. Because unfortunately with administrators, not all, but many of them, they got issues, all right? When it comes to, if an accident happens, all of a sudden they're going to forget you ever told them about this stuff. They circle their wagons. Yours is out on the prairie, all on your own. You don't want to be there, right? So please, they telling you a bunch of crap, put it in writing, be professional, but you need to educate them. Next.
Yes, and of course, the team here at Science Safety is here to help you reduce your risk through all of those things that Dr. Ken just talked about, whether it's safety program reviews or customized learning for your educators that are age and stage appropriate, safety training documentation. And I can say that one of the key findings from that journal that Dr. Ken it was just published in, it demonstrates that comprehensive safety training can reduce accidents by 51%.
Yep.
That is quantifiable. That is powerful right there. We also are offering a complimentary chemical hygiene officer training for the chemical hygiene officer in your district. It's a complimentary course worth $500. And Dr. Ken has suggested that all chemical hygiene officers should have this background and training to raise their level of safety and awareness. There's how you can contact us at Science Safety. We're at sciencesafety.com. You can call us toll free. You can email us. We are always here to help. And the references that were used in this presentation are listed here. And now it is time for some questions, Dr. Ken, and there are some that have come in during the session.
Good.
And as long as you're okay to stay for a couple of minutes, I'm going to give you these questions. I put them in the chat box as they came into Q&A. Question number one is, what if our school does not want to make changes to the lab for only one student? Ooh, what do you suggest?
They have a problem.
Right. Yeah, right.
Yeah, you need to work, first of all, do your homework. You need to get allies. You need to talk to the special ed department. You need to talk to the guidance department. Now, this is in-house to start with. All right. And you need to involve them, and you need to have a meeting with the administration so they have an understanding what the needs are and what has to be done. You may also, in some instances, have to bring in the teachers union, a representative. That's not to have a threat, but again, to help protect you. If none of this works, all right, and again, remember, you've put stuff in writing to them, and then they say, no, forget it, we're not doing any of this. All right, now you've got a problem, all right, because the problem is, if you go ahead and do these hands-on activities with these special needs students in there, you're not making any kinds of accommodations, you're not doing anything, right? You're not doing anything, right? If they get hurt, you will be it. And the reason you will be it is because you are the one legally that are responsible for safety at that site. In other words, in that laboratory, it's not the administrator. It is you who are the ones that are responsible, right? Legally, you're the one that's responsible. So you got to cover your butt. And if they say, well, you know, forget it, don't worry about it. No, then you don't do, you tell them something right. I'm sorry, this is the law. These are things we have to follow. I'm concerned for not only my safety, and you say it this way, my safety as an employee, because they know under OSHA, again, in the States, they're required legally to provide a safer working environment for their employees. All right, a safer working environment. Push comes to shove, your union can contact OSHA, have OSHA come in. All right, show them how unsafe it is, not only for you, but for the students. Because remember, if it's unsafe for the students, it potentially is unsafe for you. Right? So there are various things that you can do here, various strategies, but start, again, the grassroots people that should be in line with your thinking on this, the special needs, special ed department, and the guidance department. Then come forward and make sure it's in writing.
Right. Absolutely. Do you have time for one more question?
Yep.
I'll give you your choice.
Ah,
Or you can answer both. They're both good questions. Are there any situations that you would not allow students with special needs to participate in a lab activity?
if their needs cannot be accommodated for, no. That's the bottom line.
Right. Okay. I
That's
understand.
that's simple.
completely.
No, seriously. All right. It doesn't matter what the activity is. If you cannot accommodate them for their needs, there you go.
Right. There's no fine line between
No,
safe and
no,
unsafe.
no, because remember, they get hurt, legally, you're it.
That's correct. And here's your last question here tonight, Dr. Ken. Would a student with a severe latex allergy require special treatment in the lab? And if so, how do you do that? It's a great question.
First of all, the labs in your school should not be using any personal protective equipment that is latex based. All right. And I've even found this out in my own school. We had a situation and the student was allergic. We didn't know it. We had not been told, right? The parents never bothered to tell us. And that's one thing you always want to do. All right. You always find out before you do anything, go to talk to your school nurse, find out if they have any latex allergies or whatever. And sometimes there's even staff members that have it. Right. And the kid had a reaction, and we're lucky we had the nurse could come right away, took care of the situation, but it could have been ugly. All right. So first of all is get rid of all the latex gloves. You should be using nitrile gloves, right? Not latex, or you can use vinyl, all right? Depending on the severity of the hazard that you're dealing with. In a chem lab, it's always nitrile. In biology, it could be nitrile, though, again, it could be vinyl. Get rid of, but even aprons. Another thing you have to be careful of, all right? If you have goggles that have a latex band on it, you need to be very careful because kid can have a reaction. So you want to double check if you know specifically the kid is latex sensitive. You want to make sure that the bands that they have that are holding those goggles on are non-latex. But again, you just need to convince the department head, the chemical hygiene officer, to make sure that there's no use of latex. I mean, this is universal. It should be every school district.
Right. And I can remember from doing latex assessments. Latex was in almost everything from rubber tubing that you found in
Yep.
in labs to
Yep.
the rubber stoppers for test
Yep.
tubes and flasks.
Yeah, it's well beyond PPE, most
Oh,
certainly.
Right.
But
It's quite pronounced. There's a lot of it. But there are also alternatives to all of that as well, using natural rubber, using
absolutely.
there
You have to
are
be,
options.
bottom line is you have to be proactive. But the first thing you do is you got to find out from the school nurse, because the parents are supposed to report it to the school nurse if they know that their child has a latex type of or any kind of allergy. And as a teacher, the one that oversees safety in that laboratory, you have a responsibility to check with the nurse before, as soon as you know your class list, check, send an email. You don't ask verbally. You send an email to the school nurse and ask for the list or ask if you can have a conversation about it. All right, but you always put it in writing. You never know. You need to pull on that in your defense in a court case.
Well said. Well said. Well, Dr. Ken, on behalf of myself and on behalf of everyone in attendance and those who will watch this in the future, thank you so much for sharing your expertise, your time, and your talents with us this evening. It has been truly educational and very inspirational in many ways. And you are a verified example of educational excellence, and I am proud to call you my friend. Thank you so much, Dr. Ken. Do you have any parting words for us tonight?
Just please be safer in all you do. All right. And remember, being safer is not only for yourself, but all those that you interact with. And you carry that into the classroom, most certainly. And again, you have a lot of responsibility, believe me, a lot of responsibility. So it's good. You were smart to attend this type of thing. And again, check out Science Safety. You have a lot of really good training, informational stuff, as does the NSTA in other areas. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a great evening.